All right, welcome everybody. We're here with Grandparenting Matters, and we're going to talk about a topic that nobody really wants to talk about. And that's dealing with your adult children, in particular, dealing with adult kids who are telling you no. And that is a tough topic. Now, when we're talking about adult kids, I am not talking about 17-year-olds who are saying, I'm an adult, I should be able to make my own decisions. We're not talking about high school kids. We're probably not even really talking about college kids if they're living underneath your roof. We're talking about adult kids who no longer live with you, or maybe they are 40 and they are living with you, and that's a whole nother discussion. We're talking about adult kids. And we know there's all kinds of issues that go along with that. You know, navigating life with your adult kids is difficult. At best, it's just flat out hard. At worst, it could be a train wreck. It could be a disaster. And so the question is, what went wrong? Why was there such a U-turn in your relationships? And you got to know you are not alone. There are people in this room listening who are watching this as you're watching with this now, maybe on YouTube. But by a show of hands in the room, you personally are experiencing one of those difficult adult-child relationships, or one of your close friends is. And let's just see what percentage. If this is applying to you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's at least half of the people in this room that are dealing with this topic. They did everything right. They raised their kids in the church. They went to church. They were involved in ministry. Kids went to a Christian school. And somewhere in their 20s, and after going to college, the relationship fundamentally changed. That happy daughter that left for college came back a sullen, depressed, at times suicidal young lady. And forever their relationship was changed. They would plead with God, Lord, what should we do? They would talk to their daughter, and she was like, talk to the hand. And they were heartbroken. And they beat themselves up, and they asked, what did we do wrong? The number one question I get dealing with adult kids when the relationship has gone south is they start with blame. What did I do wrong? I got good news for you. Most likely you didn't do anything wrong. There's a lot of other factors that we're going to look at today that cause that kind of alienation. So the good news is you don't have to buckle up and white knuckle it today. You're with friends. I think that as we've clarified, we are not talking about dependents living at home. We're talking about those 20 to maybe sometimes 60-year-olds who are your adult children, or maybe your adult grandchildren, as some of you are dealing with. Now, I also want to say that some of you are living with the consequences of their choices. And there's in the literature today, there are three little options: LC, VLC, and NC. And this is, you can write that before why alienation. I'll get to that in a moment. But before we get to that question, why are we alienated? Does anybody know what those three letters stand for? The first one is they have opted for LC. That's called low contact. In fact, they quantify this in counseling with adult children and their kids, low contact. What do you think VLC means? Very low contact. You know, you are an astounding audience. You have an amazing grasp for the obvious. That's good. And then what would NC be? No contact. And so some of you in this room are in that NC category. By a show of hands, you're dealing with someone who wants no contact. Anybody? We got one. How about very little or very low contact? Anybody in that category? More hands go up. And then how many of you are dealing with just low contact? And by the way, that could be you only see them a couple times a year even. So that's what we're dealing right. I want to read you something. I read a phenomenally interesting article from the New Yorker. And in this article, it follows the relationship between a family and a daughter and their perspectives of what was going on. It goes like this. He asked if they might have a phone call. That's the dad. But Amy, responding much later, said no. She wrote back, CCing the rest of her family and asking them not to contact her again unless there was a medical emergency. She told me, this is the therapist is speaking here, when I questioned this reaction that says, I don't allow other people to treat me that way, why should my family members get a free pass? That's what she said. Do not call, do not text, do not email me, she wrote. Do not send gifts, do not send packages, letters, or deliveries. Do not come to our home. Do not use other individuals or extended family members to communicate with us by proxy. If that's you, my heart breaks for you today. If it's not you, it's okay to go, whew, thank goodness that's not our situation. See, anytime you talk about difficult things like this, everybody sees themselves on what I call the food chain of dysfunction, right? Up and down the scale. And so you get done, you kind of peg yourselves somewhere on this, and you go, oh, man, those people, they really got it bad. And then you're wondering, how come I can't be up here on the top of the food chain where their big struggle is where to go out to lunch for Mother's Day, right? And so we find ourselves everywhere on that line. Let me give you some sobering statistics, and they're in your notes, and if you're watching online, you will be able to get those if you contact me. The prevalence, roughly 1 in 4, that's 20%, 26%, 27% of U.S. families experience estrangement. Some studies suggest that up to 22 million adults are affected. That's 22, 20, 30, 40 somethings that are affected. Parental gender. Fathers are significantly more likely to be estranged from adult children, 26%, compared to mothers, which is only 6%. This might be a good time to ask, why do you think that is? Why the estrangement with the dads and not the moms? I think there's some intuitive answers that you're going to share, and you're probably right. What do you think? Say it loud. Why is the estrangement more with dads than with the moms?
Dad more strict.
Dad is more strict. That is definitely one of the factors. Anything else?
Dad's working.
Dad's working all the time. What else? What else? What could be that big? I mean, that's a huge difference. Why else?
Mom's nurtured.
Moms are the nurturers by nature, right? That's why when even in marriage relationships, what are the men commanded to do? Love your wives, right? Because loving isn't the most natural characteristic that most men exude to their kids, and until you get grandkids. And then you spoil them like rotten and send them back, right? So that doesn't always hold true. Any other reasons why the estrangement is more with men? I think there's one other factor. What happens is when there's a difficult conversation, have you ever had to do this? If you were married, you did this. And you played rock, paper, scissors as to who's going to bring the bad news, who's going to be the truth speaker, and who's going to deliver the message. And sometimes you've just fallen into the good cop, bad cop routine. Now, you could be married to the nicest, kindest, sweetest person on the planet. Her name may be Cheryl, for instance. And for those of you online, this is my wife. She is the nicest, kindest, sweetest person on the planet. I think even at her toughest moments of discipline, I think her approach would be more like, this makes me very sad, right? And when my toughest moments of discipline back when our kids were younger was bend over, the Board of Education is about to meet the seat of your understanding, right? And so just by nature, we discipline different. In fact, we had some times in our early marriage with young kids, I would plead with her just once. Could you be the bad cop? I want to be the good cop. And to this day, I think Cheryl says, good cop, bad cop. Papa, especially with our grandkids, I want you to shine. I want you to get to be the good cop. And I said, thank goodness. Thirdly, sexual orientation. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual adults are more likely to be estranged from fathers than heterosexual adults. That's 36% and versus 21%. Fourthly, we go to initiation. Adult children are the primary instigators of estrangement. They are it's rarely the folks sitting in this room that are initiation like, I don't want this anymore. On occasion you may have that, but it was probably when they're younger and you're creating a boundary about what's allowed or not allowed in your home. But at this stage, you're hoping to have contact with them at the holidays. Maybe they're away at college. Maybe they're starting their first career. They may be in a different city. But generally, it's the adult kids that are pulling away, and we're going to find out why. Next, reconciliation. While common, roughly 10% of adult children may never return. That is a sad statistic. So some of you may be facing the fact that you may never be restored with your adult kids. However, we do know that the average length of estrangement is about 5 years. My wife is firmly convinced that 20-year-old boys don't get their full frontal lobe firmly attached in their brains for another 6 or 7 years, and sometimes in their late 20s they come to their literal senses. That might be true in the Bible, right? The prodigal son finally came to his senses. And then the good news is over 80% of mothers and 60% of fathers eventually reconcile with their adult children. I'd like you to take a moment. We're going to pause here, and I want, if you're listening online, I want you to answer this question. What is your particularly tough issue that you're experiencing with your adult children? And we'll repeat some of our answers, but maybe you can talk amongst yourselves as well. What are some of those tough situations that you're facing with your adult kids? Just shout them out and I'll repeat them. Anybody? Divorce. The kids are divorced?
They're getting divorced.
Oh, they're getting divorced. And that's particularly hard if you're dealing with adult grandchildren who are getting divorced as well. Okay, what's another one? Tough issue.
Too busy.
They're too busy. Too busy for you? Yeah, too busy to have a relationship. Okay? What else?
Liberal versus conservative.
Oh, liberal versus conservative. We will get to politics and church and religion here in just a moment. Yes, so true. What else?
Not attending church.
They just don't attend church. Faith is not their thing anymore. They do not go to church regularly. Okay? What else?
The grandparent may not be interested.
The grandparent may not be interested in having a relationship with, so it is initiated by the grandparent or the parent with the adult child. So that's just the reverse. So that's when you say no, right, versus them saying no. What else?
My daughter doesn't want to hear about Christ.
All right, my daughter doesn't want to hear about Christ. So sad. How many of you, by a show of hands, have an adult child who says, yeah, not so interested in that anymore? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, many of you in this room know exactly what we're talking about. All right, anything else? Last answer?
Money. The adult children are not getting the amount of money that they have expected. So now they're estranged.
Oh my goodness.
5 years and 5 months.
So they're not getting the money they thought would happen as they got older, whether it's inheritance or... This is especially tricky if you're in a second marriage and the kids perceive that that new spouse, man or woman, is a bit of a gold digger, and they can see their inheritance just flying away, etc. I often go, after I'm here, on a Sunday to a convalescent hospital not far from here to visit with an 85-year-old man who was Jewish all of his life and then came to faith in Christ maybe 5-10 years ago. His daughter was a strong Christian and grew up in our youth group at the time in Huntington Beach. And it is very interesting. They have a good relationship, but she lives very far away. And so I often come in and sit with him. But he doesn't talk. He does not talk. I think he's far more interested in watching the Rams or the Dodgers or the Clippers or the Lakers, and he'd be very content. But he's not getting his PT done, and he's just pretty much bedridden. And I think he could be out of that bed. And so I wondered one day, what would it take, because I call his daughter, who lives up in Fresno, and give her a little report when I'm driving home. This is what we did. This is what we talked about. Tried to do a Bible study. I think he'll be in heaven, but he does have no interest. I think he's kind of given up, right? And all that to say, I said, I gotta change this up. See how we can help this guy, because that's exceedingly difficult for the adult child. She wants to have a relationship. He just doesn't talk. And her mom died years ago, and he's remarried to someone else who rarely comes to see him. So I may see him more than his own wife, and I know I see him more than his own daughter. So one time I said, Cheryl, can you just come with me to see Carl? I think he just needs to hear somebody else. All of a sudden, quiet Carl becomes chatty Kathy, or chatty Carl, because I got Cheryl, and she's just talking, and I just kind of backed up, moved my chair out of the way, and she moved in, and they talked for an hour. And I thought, you're never going home. You're coming with me every time, because it's twice now. She's saved the day, and I just was there, a bump on the log. So some of this, by the way, with your adult kids, sometimes they're just really introverts, and they just don't talk. And some of you are introverts, and you don't talk. And so you may have to work even harder on how you connect with your adult kids in the way that they want to communicate. Yes?
I think one of the big things that happens with kids as they become adults is they wind up disillusioned with life. It's not like they expected it to be, and they wind up blaming their parents for it.
Yes.
That happens a lot.
And that's going to be one of our principles we'll talk about. Disillusionment with life, and we got to find someone to blame, because I'm certainly the victim, right? And so let's get to that question. Why the alienation? Why do we have this alienation? Now, I could give you days of material on that, but I'm going to give you 4 big ideas, and you could find many more. On the back of your outline, by the way, I've given you some great books, and my friend Jim Burns wrote 2 of them, Doing Life with Your Adult Children and When Your Adult Child Strays, Trading Heartache for Hope. That hasn't even been released. And I got a copy of it at the grandparenting thing. Then, of course, the classic book, Boundaries by Henry Cloud. You should read that, because sometimes you just do have to have those boundaries. But the biggest book that's been on the market that gives us so much information is Joshua Coleman, The Rules of Estrangement, Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. I would recommend anybody who's wrestling, if you only got one of those 5 books, get that one. And then, of course, Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, because if you're dealing with grandkids, which is a parallel topic to this, they are anxious, and they're raised to be anxious, which we won't talk about today, but we may do another seminar on that later. So why the alienation? Number 1, mental health. Number 1 is mental health. And I've learned from Pastor David, here's all the blanks you're going to need. You can fill them in, and then I'll talk about them. Mental health. It's been determined, or they've been told that a relationship with you emotionally is unhealthy. They've been told by a therapist, most of the time a secular therapist, that being with you, connected to you, is just an unhealthy thing. It might be true But it's more likely that's their own internal propaganda that they've kind of bought the story, they've bought the lie. Joshua Coleman, the guy I referred to, says that estrangement is becoming more common in part because of changing notions of what constitutes harmful, abusive, traumatizing, or neglectful behavior. Doesn't that make sense? Wait a second. There was a day when it was okay to say, that's wrong, don't do that. And now that's abusive language, right? Or whatever, right? So many things that were considered, or, I know we should all wear seatbelts, but I can tell you the best seatbelt ever known to man was Grandma's flabby little arm that when we went forward, they just put the arm on and push. You didn't need a pillow. You had Grammy's arm, and that's soft, and it was cuddly. And unless you hit her knuckle, you survived, right? He goes on to say, cited by a paper by the psychologist by the name of Nick Haslam, that showed that the definition of trauma has expanded in the past 3 decades to include experiences that were once considered ordinary. The bar for qualifying as trauma today is much lower. And if you have experienced trauma, you're going to, as Pat has shared, you're going to find someone to blame, and they point the finger back at you. So he goes on to write in his book, Rules of Estrangement, he devotes an entire chapter to the prevalence of psychotherapy with the subhead says, my therapist says you're a narcissist, and concludes that therapist perspectives often critically reflect the biases and vogues and fads of the culture in which we live. In a culture that values independence, in other words, a therapist might advise a clean break. Today, more than any other time in our nation's history, children are setting the terms of family life in the United States. That sums it up perfectly. You're the problem, and you're toxic. And if you're not toxic, you're for sure a narcissist. Now, if you're people of faith, how does that sit with you? Because we've been told as people of faith, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. We've also been told to speak the truth in love. And so when you hear those things, how does that make you feel? What do you think? When you hear that, what does that do to your heart, your soul?
Makes you defensive.
It makes us defensive. Of course. You're a narcissist. I am not. Yes, you are. Everything revolves on you. No, it doesn't. Where are we going to dinner? And you say, wherever you want. No, you just say that because I'm in this argument with you. And it just goes round and round, right? What else? How else does it make you feel? When you hear stuff like that.
Hurt.
You're hurt. Absolutely. And I think if you showed those emotions, it's okay. Honey, that really hurts me. I'm not trying to pick on you, but I love you. And it hurts. It hurts me. Yeah. Anything else that makes you feel, or what's going through your mind? I think if we're completely honest with ourselves, if there is a kernel of truth to what they're saying, it causes most of us to become very reflective. And that's when you pray this prayer. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any wicked way in me. By the way, that's a good principle for anything in life that's difficult for you to hear, and you don't initially want to hear it, and you want to maybe push back. The second thing under that mental health thing is they say I'm toxic. Sherry Campbell, a psychologist in California, has written several books on cutting ties with family members. She's pro cutting ties, which I don't love. Says this, her practice is full of healthy people trying to figure out how to cope with toxic people in their lives. Now, she tries to defend this by saying toxic people are different from flawed people. I mean, I'm a parent. I'm flawed, she said. But toxic people, and I think this is an interesting insight, toxic people are very bad people with good moments. They're not good people with some bad moments. So, here's the hard thing. Are you toxic? I don't know. Are you a narcissist? I don't know. Do you want to be different than how you're perceived? That involves a tough conversation. And it probably involves you looking hard at yourself and asking, is that true? It may be involved by you turning to the one you're married to and say, is that true? By the way, the person who can tell me the most truth about me personally is my wife. I'll hear it from her. Now, I may not initially want to hear it, and I might be defensive, and I might be stubborn, and I might be pig-headed, but she has my back. She has my best interest, and she's not there to make me feel bad or humiliated. She just wants it to be better, and she's the best one for me to hear it. If you're single and don't have a spouse that can speak into your life, then you got to talk to someone that you trust that knows you well and say, is any part of this possibly true? By the way, Satan would love to keep you in the dungeon of doubt and depression that it's all your fault. And I want to make sure you hear this balance of search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there be any wicked way. And the other is, this is just a lie. And I cannot live with the lie from the pit of hell. I'm going to have to move forward. I hear you. I just am not going to own everything that you're dealing out. Okay? Here's the problem. She says, the problem with calling someone toxic is that it's completely in the eye of the beholder. No one self-identifies and goes, yeah, I'm toxic. You're an Aquarius. I'm a toxic. Right? Nobody does that. It's a label applied to someone by someone who is angry at the other person. That's if someone's calling you toxic, they're the angry one, and that's a way to get back at you. The term also forecloses the possibility of bridging the divide. If you consider a family tie toxic, then there's no reason anymore to try to work on it or to consider the other person as a human being. See, if they can dehumanize it, and this is like for my protection, you're a predator in my life, then you don't have to have a relationship because this is for their mental well-being. You think, do people... how do people who are estranged from their parents, how do they deal with it? I ran across 2 support groups. Reddit has a support group right now called r/estranged adult child. They've got 40,000 members. There's another one called r/raised by narcissist. They have 1 million people that follow that group. So apparently, there's an awful lot of toxic narcissists out there, and hopefully we're not one of them, but it's become a thing, all right? The reality is, childhood sexual abuse by fathers or emotional abuse from mothers and rage and anger issues are a part of adult-child relationships. And maybe you were an alcoholic at one time and you were abusive. Maybe you were emotionally abusive. Maybe you were physically abusive. Some of you in this room were physically and sexually abused by your father. And you made your peace or you didn't make your peace, and maybe you're saying there's a reason I have boundaries with my parents. Now, most of you, your parents, I think, have probably passed on, or you're caring for one who hasn't passed on. And that's why it's always a good read to go back to Henry Cloud and read the book Boundaries, because it would be helpful for you just to find where you fall on that issue. The second one is any question about mental health related alienation. Okay. Number 2 is value alignment. And this is what you were getting at over there. Their values and your values are just not in alignment. Now, what do we mean by that? It could be as innocent as best child rearing practices. All of a sudden, you've become a moron, Grandpa, because the way you raise kids and how they raise them today are 2 different ways. I personally think that it's okay for a kid to cry a little bit and then they'll fall asleep. But if you pick them up every single time they cry, oh my goodness. Now, you don't think I have any personal passion about that, do you? Just don't ask me to babysit overnight if I have to hold them all night long. Discipline, how you deal with discipline, different era and discipline. Most of you grew up in spare the rod, spoil the child. Others of you grew up in more of an environment that, timeouts rule the day. But you had a way it worked, and for the most part, it probably did work with you with your kids to a certain point until it didn't. And then as you deal with adult kids, they definitely have a bias and remembrance of how you did it with them. So, case in point, my kids are 39 and 41, all right? I have good relationships with both of them, but the 39-year-old, the younger one, who was a boy, it was so easy. I could have written so many books on being a great parent because I had a firstborn named Katie. I'm telling you, she was a typical firstborn by the book. I mean, she was reading things before I asked her to read them. She was obedient. We could put her in a downstairs bedroom with a walkout basement door because she would never think of sneaking out at night. Whereas the elder one, we locked his door and locked him. No, we didn't. But, very different. So if we were disciplining Katie when she was younger, I am not exaggerating. It would go something like this. Katie, I'm very disappointed by your behavior. It hurts me very much. And her little lip would quiver. I'm sorry, Daddy. I will never do it again. I haven't even named the behavior, and she's crying, right? She was repentant. John Daniel comes along. John Daniel, your behavior really hurts my soul. Pops, you ought to deal with it. He's 6 years old. He's 7 years old. I'm telling you, another day, another time, I'll tell you about a story when he snuck out at night, but very differently. By the way, they both have fond memories of their childhood. They also remember some tough times in their childhood. You cannot be held hostage to mistakes you made when they were kids that have been forgiven. And I'm not talking about you took their life in their hands. I'm talking about the same mistakes every parent has made. Every single one of you probably raised your voice when you said, I probably shouldn't have raised my voice. Unless, of course, you're Cheryl, and she's just as sweet and kind. By the way, she's hating this because this is recorded for all posterity right now. And I said, watch the video, babe. Be sweet to me. So the bottom line is we did make mistakes. But you don't have to be punished the rest of your life because you weren't a perfect parent. That's not the deal here. Lord knows how horrible COVID was and how it destroyed families. Vaccine or no vaccine, mask or not a mask. Come and see us, don't come and see us. Tough. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. The other value alignment issue under that is politics. They are not interested in what the right has to say and are completely frustrated with partisan politics in general. They're anti-Trumpers, but they haven't kind of really figured out, well, what is the other party or the other candidate going to do for me? And who represents my values? And they don't know who represents their values. They just know who doesn't represent their values. But when they dig deeper, they may find out, maybe that candidate does represent my values, but I just don't like how he says it, right? We have dear friends who live in Texas. And we both had international students from China living with us 10 years ago. And that's how we became friends. And we were surrogate parents for kids from China. And they went to a very influential school up in Ventura County. And so the bottom line is they have adult kids. They raised them well, went to church. These 3 daughters were all involved in ministry. These people quit early and became missionaries and served on overseas. And now it's time to move back to the States. And they got a not so subtle message by one of their daughters. Yeah, you can move to Texas, but we don't want you anywhere near us. You can live in the state. So they live in Houston to care for an aging parent. By the way, on top of all this, just a sidebar, any of you who have adult children and you are dealing with a parent that you are caring for now, I'm just tired thinking about it for you because it's exhausting because you're squeezed on both ends. You're trying to maintain a relationship with your adult children. You got a parent that you're caring for. How many of you are caring for an aging parent? Actively, or you got one? Yeah, many of us in this room are caring for an adult parent. All right. When do they start caring for us? What age do I get cared for? Who's bringing me the chocolate chip ice cream? I'm just kidding. All right. So that was tough on them. When they go to visit them, they have to stay in a hotel because they can't be in their home, even though they have plenty of room to be in their home. Third issue of alienation, I'm just going to call God issues, and we'll just put abandoned faith. Abandoned faith. Somewhere along the line, they had a disappointment with God, and so their theology begins to drift. Here's how it goes. They didn't hear from God in the way that they had hoped, and their prayers weren't answered the way they wanted, so God must not love me, and I'm just not good enough, apparently, for God. That's one way. That's kind of a vanilla version of lack of faith. Here's a more likely one. They were wounded by Christian friends or pastors, people who were judgmental, gossipers, or just plain mean. I don't want any part of that anymore. Or they saw the hypocrisy in a church, or maybe they saw it in you. And then if it's a youth group thing, many kids got alienated in youth ministry somewhere along the line and never came back for whatever reason. So if you have kids or grandkids in this youth ministry, you ought to be thanking God every day for what is happening in this church. And by evidence, by these baptisms that are happening every quarter, and the number of kids that are coming to know Jesus here. Doesn't it just makes me cry? I mean, and you go, don't. We've seen you cry. It's ugly. I get it. But isn't that awesome? Isn't it awesome that you get to be a part of a church? And by the way, if you're watching online, you don't know where this church is. It's called Journey South Bay in Redondo Beach off of Hawthorne and 190th. It is an awesome church. Come and visit. And so that's some of the abandoned faith. The bigger issue is I think that the emergence of secular humanism, right, and the lack of moral absolutes corrupted their worldview. And so they just gradually abandoned their faith. Jim Burns calls it moral aimlessness. They left home for college, then they caved to the cultural pressure to accept evolution, the idea that hell isn't for real, that homosexuality and transgenderism isn't a choice, and it's okay to be gay, abortion is the right of every woman to choose, toxic masculinity is manifested in the most heterosexual men, and all men are misogynists. If you've been fed a steady diet of that at a secular university, no wonder you say, I don't want any part of that. It's no wonder the homeschool movement has just mushroomed over the last 20 years because those kids are at a very pliable stage in their life. And by the way, I don't know when they're not pliable, because no matter when, they're going to hear stuff that's contrary to how they've been taught. And if we don't teach them how to think, not just what to think, we're going to lose the battle, friends. Do you agree? Okay. One of the saddest things that I know of is, I've respected a ton of pastors over the years, and two things disappoint me. Number one is when a pastor that I've followed has fallen morally. And I go, oh man, another one bites the dust. And I won't go the long litany of pastoral heroes that I've had in my life that kind of forfeited that right. And I mean, there's so many people. I mean, the most recent one, he wasn't a pastor, is Philip Yancey, who admits to a 7-year affair when he's like pushing 80 and finally admits that he's not been faithful to his wife. And he's dropped out of ministry to focus on his marriage, thank goodness. But two of the saddest are two great men of the faith, John Piper and Chuck Swindoll. And it just breaks my heart. They each have a son that have just completely renounced their Christian beliefs. And, we can always say, well, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors. I do know this. Pastors' families are under attack. And I hope you're praying for your pastor, Pastor David, every single day. Now, he has adult kids. His last one just graduated from college this week and is being launched. But I hope you're praying for him and his kids, and I hope you're praying for one another and their kids. One of the best things you can do in your life group is to pray for each other's adult kids by name. Know their names. Know what the issues are and pray for each other. So I think that the other issue in this whole secular humanism thing is I listed for you all Gen Zs. Does everybody understand who's what? Gen Z, Alpha, all that? Gen Z are essentially the current high school and young adults. Gen Alpha would be your grandkids that are younger than that. But here's what Barna research, and I put them in there for your notes. Here's what they're saying. This is what they view the church being. And the percentages: anti-homosexual, judgmental, hypocritical, too political, out of touch with reality, insensitive to others, boring, not accepting other faiths, and confusing. Bottom line, the church didn't give them answers that they wanted or hoped for. Fourth reason for alienation is gender fluidity. Gender fluidity. In other words, sexual disorientation becomes prominent in their relationships. Does everybody understand gender dysphoria and what I mean by that term? Gender dysphoria. It wasn't even a word in your vocabulary 20 years ago, I can tell you for a fact. Gender dysphoria is very simply said is that they believe that they were made one way and their sexuality is determined by their experiences and what they feel, not by their biological plumbing. And so the transgender movement exploded on the scene for most of you when Bruce Jenner, who's 2 suburbs over from my house a few years ago, decided he wasn't the greatest decathlete in all history, and Bruce Jenner changed his name to Caitlyn Jenner, and for the first time most people had to deal with transgender deals. We were just trying to figure out homosexuality and lesbianism, and then that happens, and now it's super confusing. So now you may have an adult child who identifies as transgender and is marrying a lesbian, and now you're really confused who's who, right? The other issue that's part of gender fluidity that no one wants to talk about is pornography. Pornography has corrupted the age of innocence, and all the research says onset of first exposure to porn is 11 years old and getting younger. 11 years old. And you wonder why parents allow 12-year-olds to have one of these? I don't think so, friends. That was a lot easier. My daughter got her first flip phone when she went to college. All right? She's 42. Do the math. That's 20 years ago. Bottom line is, you gotta, to help your kids and your grandkids dealing with porn, you can't do that too soon. Here's the other issue. They think that they are gay or lesbian because of their lack of connection or emotional intimacy with the opposite sex. You got kids being pressured to be sexually active as 13 and 14-year-olds in junior high groups, not so much church groups, obviously, but at school. And Snapchat and sexting and pictures, it's horrifying. Girls are seeking emotional connection. Guys are involved with multiple sexual partners, experimenting, and then bragging about what they did or didn't likely do. I was teaching as a teaching pastor up in Glendora before I came here. For a year, I was the interim there. And I decided to visit one of the men's Bible studies that were predominantly older guys, retired guys. By the way, old guys who get together for Bible study have been affectionately known now as Romeo groups. Retired old men eating out. Romeo. Yeah, thought I had you there, didn't I? And this was kind of a Romeo group, except it met at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night. And there were 16 men in the group. 8 of the 16 were dealing with a grandkid who was identifying as gay, homosexual, bisexual, or transgender. 8 out of 16 in a Baptist church, and they're pulling their hair out. They didn't have much to pull out, but what little they did, they were pulling their hair out because it was so aggravating. And what are you supposed to do? And how do you love your grandkids? And it's a tough, tough thing. If you want a book on that, Christopher Ewan, Holy Sexuality in the Gospel, and I forgot to put it on your outline, but Holy Sexuality and the Gospel. We got to hear him speak recently. And by the way, if you want the best books on screen and screens at grandkids, it's Arlene Pelican. Both Christopher Ewan and Arlene live in San Diego. My dream is to get them in the same room at the same time talking to us. I may mean that you have to go to San Diego to hear them, but maybe they could talk to us. All right? Now, let's get to the good stuff. Here's 3 landmines I can help you avoid. By the way, any questions at this point? Anybody going, something didn't make sense? You're very good. Very observant. All right, here we go. 3 landmines to avoid. Flip your page over here. First one is giving unsolicited advice. Yeah, giving unsolicited advice. All right? Now, why is unsolicited advice a problem? Because it's often seen as criticism, right? They didn't ask for it, but you gave it, so you must be critical of them. So here's what you got to do. You got to identify when it's time to speak up and when it's time to listen up. Let me tell you what you'll never regret. You'll never regret listening first. Ever. You listen first, think twice, and then maybe you speak. Maybe you speak up. Or you just listen and say, that must be really hard. When they ask you, Pops, what would you do? You have an entree. You say, but my kid never says Mom or Dad, what would you do? Well, then they're not ready for your unsolicited advice. Does that make sense? Okay. Is it easy to do? It's hard. Winston Churchill said it this way. He says, you will never reach your destination if you stop and throw stones at every dog that barks. That's true. Choose your battles. Choose your battles wisely. Because we sleep, every time I'm here on a Sunday, likely, Cheryl and I have spent the night in Orange County with our son and our granddaughter and our daughter-in-law, and she's 4 or 5 months old now, and we probably both have some opinions about stuff. Do we say it? No way. I do draw the line as I am not climbing over that fence into that little pit called a playpen, because I will never get out again. So she'll sleep all night because I'm not being able to get out of the pen. Yeah, we just stuff it. And that's innocent stuff, right? There are a lot more serious things where you do want to speak up. Here's the other thing. Know the difference between a conversation and a lecture. Let's look at some of those books, but I want to tell you this Jim Burns thing about the difference between conversation and lecture. In dealing with your adult children, he says on page 49, he gives us the differences between a conversation and a lecture. Now, I thought it was fascinating because it's actually on page 44, not page 49. Here's the difference. You know you're giving a lecture when you do most of the talking, your voice is raised, you sound a little preachy, you sound like you're speaking to a child, and your statements make you sound superior. You know you're having a conversation when you're listening to and reflecting on what the other person says, you engage in a dialogue, your tone and demeanor show respect, your language is free from you should statements, and you have been given permission to speak into the other person's life. This stuff is gold. You should have it. So here's what I've learned. Ask open-ended questions. And by the way, the statement, whether it's in evangelism or dealing with your adult kids, is, tell me more. That's interesting. Tell me more. Oh, tell me. I have a Bible study with my 39-year-old son every Thursday or Wednesday from 7 a.m. to 8:30. And we're reading the book, The Unseen Realm. That's not important, but the bottom line is we're in the Word and we're talking. And there are times where I said, Johnny, I have no brain capacity to follow this theological rabbit trail. Help me here. It is so great when your son, who he loves me dearly, and he respects me as a pastor. He thinks I'm Walter Martin, the Kingdom of the Cults guy and the Bible answer man. And I'm not. But I tell him I'm not. It doesn't matter. He thinks I am. But we were studying the Word together before the Dodger game yesterday morning, and we were talking about something, and I am sleepy. And the worst thing I want to do is fall asleep in a conversation with my son while we're doing Bible study. And it was tough. I made it, and I finally said, my brain can't handle anymore, Johnny. I got to get ready for the game. But the bottom line is, I ask him a lot of open-ended questions. What do you think that means? Or what would you do? How did that work out? Here's something else I've learned. Talk with them, not at them. We can be very preachy, and, I'm a preacher. I'm good at it, I think. And so it comes naturally to, thus saith the Lord. Here's the way you do it. Ephesians 4:32. Speaking the truth in love. If it's all truth and there's no love, you're going to hurt them. If it's all love and there's no truth, that's half-truth or hypocrisy. And the Bible's principle is truth plus love equals honesty. I know that's a math formula, but it works. I wanted to show you this book, The Rules of Estrangement by Joshua Coleman. That's the book that everyone should be reading if that's an issue with your adult child. Okay? Next, the second landmine to kind of avoid is guilt trips about biblical values. But they're near and dear to me, Pastor. I mean, I believe strongly in inerrancy and, whatever the topic is, and Jesus is the only way, and sola scriptura. I get that. Here's something to write down. It's not in your notes. Your spiritual opinions, aka convictions, don't have to become their moral imperatives. Your spiritual convictions and opinions, which are valid, don't have to become their moral imperatives. That is so hard. Because for us, it's a death or life thing. It's eternity or not. It's heaven or hell. I get it. But that isn't always how they're going to receive it. This is especially true when you feel the Bible supports your conviction. It's not just an opinion. You're dealing with politics and we're all over the map with that. But the Bible does speak to certain things. And it's unequivocal. It's not ambiguous. It doesn't take rocket science to figure it out, right? So in those cases, you got to be especially careful to not give them a guilt trip. Here's a little idea, and I'm right, and this is true. Your adult kids know what you believe. There's not ambiguity about that. You've raised them. They watched you. For good and for bad, they were watching and they were listening. They just choose to reject it. And that is the dagger in your spiritual heart. I get it. It is so hard. Because that's where the devil comes in. He's going to say, see, you caused this. It's your fault. You were too dogmatic. You were too direct. You did all the truth speaking. You did no loving. And it's all false. It's all false lies from the pit of hell. Even if a fraction of it's true, it's not your fault. You didn't cause this. They made choices. And I feel strongly about that because the journey, a 10-year journey we had with our son in his 20s, where it went south in a big way. And now, years later, I can just tell you, don't give up. Keep praying. There might Not will be. There might be hope. That's what you got to cling to. Because some of you will lose your faith if your prayers don't get answered. Your spiritual life cannot be determined by someone else's choices. And that's hard. Because you're vested. And you can't understand why they're not vested. Just know when you have a strong biblical conviction, they don't see the conviction. They feel shame and judgment. Our son put it this way. He said, Cheryl has quoted this and talked about it with many of the ladies. When he was coming back to the Lord, we had searched our soul. Did we cause this? He said, no, Dad, you and Mom were living in the light. And I was in such a dark place. Your light exposed my darkness, and I couldn't handle it. I just couldn't handle it. We, one time, it was just like Chris Farley down by the river living in a trailer. And if you don't know that routine, ask your Gen X kids. But the bottom line is they were all smoking pot. I could have got secondary pot smoke euphoria being in that confined space. And I spent some time with a bunch of these 20-somethings. And Cheryl would bring him groceries and things. And one time I was there, I started talking to a kid who was playing guitar. I used to play guitar. Oh, play for me, Mr. Erwin. By then they had realized they don't have to stop pocket because Johnny's moniker, because he was throwing hip-hop shows at the time, was Fatty J. So I was known as Fatty J's dad, was in the house, and he's cool. Because the first time I walked in, they all went, and they're like trying to swallow the weed that they're smoking, and that's bad for your mouth and your lungs. And so I was talking to these kids. Every single one was estranged from their parents, except for us. He was living on his own, but we weren't estranged because he was welcome home anytime. He decided to not do illegal drugs or sell them from our garage, among other things. By the way, he figured that out too. You know, you can grow pot hydroponically and to get a medical license and sell it legally to dispensaries, and his washer and dryer room became a veg chamber. If you know those words, you know because you've dealt with kids who've done pot. So we were talking this one time, and when that was all over, I never thought anything about it, but John tells us later that his friends pulled him aside and said these words, "You're a moron." What do you mean? You got parents like that, and you're living here? They were incredulous because they would die to have a relationship with their parents that was non-existent. So no matter how tense it is, never close the door. Do the Motel 6 thing. Leave the light on, right? Create a space, a path for them to get back. And that will be humbling and hard. I don't say it's easy. Here's a prayer. Teach me to parent the kids I have, not the kids I thought I would have. That's especially true if your kids are disappointing you right now and they're not making the best choices in life. By the way, we're not going to talk about when you bail them out or don't bail them out and how much money you give and how many times they go to rehab. That's a whole other topic, and that's beyond my pay grade right now. Thirdly, never do this. Don't do the giving and taking away thing. What do I mean by that? Don't resort to threats about writing them out of your will or your estate. That is just so damaging. Doesn't mean you have to talk about it, but you just don't do that. Don't do those idle threats. And here's another thing. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. Don't threaten, but don't overpromise. Yeah, we're going to do this. Yeah, are you? When? Right? And so be careful about that. All right, let's wrap this up. Build bridges. Third point. And obviously the parenthesis is not fences. So how do you restore a relationship? I'd say here are 3 things to do. Acknowledge that dealing with rejection is painful. Some of you are so stoic, you've never shed a tear about the agony that's possessing your soul, and it hurts you. It hurts you. Say it. Tell someone sitting next to you. Cry with them. Hold them. Let them know this is agony. This is killing me. And you know what? If we would be more honest, if any place we should be honest, it should be in this place, in this church, in our small groups. There's no image to maintain. I know you think you have to maintain it. Just tell the truth. Some of you that I'm closest to is because we've had some very difficult, not with me, but you've bared your soul and you've told me about stuff in your family, and my heart is breaking for you. I can't always solve it, but I can sure listen and I can pray. And sometimes there's no obvious solutions. I know that. I know that. But it's super hard not to take it personally when your kids reject your faith. I get it. But those are real feelings. You are not alone. By show of hands, anything that I've said today, you go, yep, that's me. And it could have been one point and nothing else applies to you. But if something I've said today, yep, I can relate to that, raise your hand. Raise them high and then look around how many hands are up. Nearly everybody in the room has experienced something that I've just talked about. So we got to do life together, right? Let's do it together. And if you come to our grandparenting class, we always do life together. It's mostly around grandparenting, but it's really about life. Because sometimes we're talking about, some of you are taking care of adults called your parents, and they're in their 90s, and they're one fall away from being in assisted living. We know that. All right. Next, I would say this. Become what Christ has called you to be versus being combative about their choices. You be Christ. You be who God's called you to be. All right? Don't be combative. You got to be caring, but not create dependency. Okay? And that's a fine line, and that's a whole other topic, how to do that. Number 2, become a student of their culture. Write this down. Write Axis, A-X-I-S, and just write Cultural Translator. Look up that website. I'll show you after we're off camera. I'll show it to you. So awesome. It's so good to help you understand what's going on in culture around you. And then be a grandma or grandpa who lives with awe. You go, what's that mean? A-W-E, awe. It's not awesome. It stands for affection, warmth, encouragement. I did a little research with my son the other day. I said, what did you remember? Because some of this is dealing with your adult grandkids or older teenage kids. And what did he remember about the 4 parents, our parents? It was amazing what he thought was important when he was 6, 7, 8, and what he remembers as a 39-year-old. First thing he said about my dad, 2 things. He loved that he would pick us up from the airport when we flew in at Christmas from Minnesota, and that he would make the first stop be at In-N-Out Burger. He remembers that from the time he was a small child. The second thing he remembered was the Dodger 76 styrofoam ball that was used as the place you could drive in. That's how far you drove your car in the garage. That stopped. Some people use tennis balls, but he used that. And the third thing, remember, is Pop, my dad, smoked, and Mom would have nothing to do with it. So he was banished to the garage for the last several years of his life if he wanted to smoke. And so he had a transistor radio, and he would sit with his grandpa listening to the Dodgers while he's toking away. He said, if the truth be known, that's probably where I got my affinity for smoking, which my son finally broke a 20-year habit 2 years ago. So that's what he remembered. What did he remember about my mom? My mom, who was kind of by the book, strict, more of a truth teller, she said, Grandma never followed her own rules. I said, what do you mean? She was the best. She would give us Haagen-Dazs ice cream and never tell you. She would give us Fifth Avenue candy bars. And he says, to this day, Fifth Avenue is my favorite candy bar. I did not know that. I've been his dad for 39 years. I did not know Grandma was behind the scenes obliterating all of our nutritional choices. Thirdly, Cheryl's mom, what did he remember? So awesome. She's still alive. She's 92. She goes, she writes me these letters to this day. And she sends cards on holidays. And she puts stickers and Bible verses in. She's been doing that since they were 5. He's 39. And he still loves getting stickers and Bible verses. Grandmas, unite. Share stickers with each other. Keep sending them. It's working. And then Cheryl's parents were divorced when she was 3. So his contact with her dad was not as great. But when we would come to visit him in Pasadena, I said, what do you remember about Grandpa Tom? He said, cooking. And he was a gourmet cook. And he tried and ate things he would never have eaten, because we're more of a, like, have some meatloaf and potatoes and let's have steak and chicken and tacos. And then he said, but I became close with Grandpa when he had begun to lose it, and for 2 months he lived and cared for his grandfather before he had to go into assisted living. Right out of college, instead of getting a job, he moved to Pasadena to live with him for 2 months. By the way, that's when he was a rebel. He was the rebel who was growing pot in his washer dryer room and his veg chamber, and then caring for his grandpa. So do you see the juxtaposition? You have kids, adult kids and grandkids, that it's not always in alignment. So here's what I choose to do and you should do. Now I'm preaching. I know I've gone from preaching to complete on meddling right now. Let's just believe the best about them and not assume the worst. And then we trust God for the messy middle. Sound good? All right. Then thirdly, create a safe place for dialogue. Create a safe place for dialogue. You already said it's so hard not to be defensive. By the way, you may think it's a safe dialogue and they're not quite there yet. So that's something you massage and work on to create what a safe dialogue looks like. And then, you got to realize that your role as a parent's changing. You're the coach and consultant now. By the way, it's awesome having grandkids, though. They still think you know everything. My 7-year-old grandkid, Oaks, he thinks we know everything except when it comes to medical things, because he already knows he's going to be a surgeon and I'm a doctor. And Papa, that's not how the circulatory system works. Good to know, Oaks. Here's what Jim Burns says. Be nice to your adult children. They will most likely be the ones who someday take away your car keys and usher you into the convalescent care facility. Be nice to them. Be encouraging, but don't be intrusive. And here's my last word of advice. You don't have to say everything you think, no matter how right you think you are. Amen? Amen. I'm going to close with a story from a children's book. So get your blankie, get your thumbsucker thing, and I want to read you a little allegory parable. There's a children's book called The Runaway Bunny by Margaret Wise Brown, the author of Goodnight Moon. In the book, a bunny tells her mother that he wants to run away. If you run away, the mother says, I will run after you. Well, first he says that he'll escape by becoming a fish in a trout stream. But his mother counters that she'll become a fisherman and catch him. If he becomes a rock on the mountain, she'll become a mountain climber. And it goes on and on. Shucks, he sighs eventually. His mother replies, have a carrot. Since its publication in 1942, The Runaway Bunny has never been out of print. The idea that a child might reject his parents is frightening, but there's a question buried in the story as well. Is it even possible? If we make ourselves into a boat and sail away, will our family just turn out to be the wind? Interesting perspective. Keep chasing, keep believing, and it's a messy middle. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would help us navigate this life of dealing with adult children. It's not easy. Our hearts are breaking. We want to support one another, and sometimes we just don't know what to do or what to say. Give us those words in those moments. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.